Good day, everyone. We're just loading everyone into the session. So we'll just take another moment before we begin. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Patrick Sullivan, and I'm the President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to start by introducing our ASL interpreter, Karina Burris, with interpreter services for Society of Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I'd also like to introduce Amber Tudor, who'll be running the cart service today, and I think some of our slides. You can access captions and the full transcript by clicking on the CC button along the bottom of your Zoom window. I'd like to thank Nova Scotia Business Inc. for supporting today's event. I'm really looking forward to today's event. As you may know, we're just kicking off National Accessibility Week across Canada. The Government of Canada describes this week as an opportunity to celebrate the valuable contributions of Canadians with disabilities and to recognize the efforts of individuals, communities, and workplaces that are actively working to remove barriers to accessibility and inclusion. The Chamber supports the provincial government's mandate to require every business to be fully accessible by 2030. To improve and strengthen our business community, we need spaces that are welcoming to everyone. Before, however, we can accomplish this necessary goal, we must educate ourselves. What does accessibility really mean? What is true inclusion? Where do I start? Today, we have accessibility experts to guide us through the Accessibility Act and the grants and opportunities available to help your business be inclusive. If you have questions throughout the presentations, please type them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end of the session during our Q&A portion. Our first guest today is Dawn Stegan, Interim Executive Director with the Accessibility Directorate within the province. Welcome, Dawn, and over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. And good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to be here today with a couple of members of the Accessibility Directorate team. You may not see them now, but you'll see them during our question and answer period. I like to call them the A-team. Our Senior Policy Analyst, Josh Bates, and Carolyn Reed-Candell have joined us. And we're here today to talk a bit about the Accessibility Act and the work of the Directorate, and provide an update on the progress being made to meet the commitments to improve accessibility for Nova Scotians with disabilities and what this means for businesses. And so I first want to, we know the impact of COVID-19 is being felt by all businesses in Nova Scotia, and you're navigating some broad range interrelated issues. And so we appreciate the time that you're taking today to hear about this important work. It's really a culture shift that requires collaboration and innovation and transformation, and it involves all of us. So I'm going to have Carolyn help me with some slides here. And so we're on the first slide, which is really about some statistics. So let's start here. 30.4% of Nova Scotians 15 years and older have at least one disability. That's almost 230,000 Nova Scotians. That's 1 in 3. That's the highest percentage than any province in Canada, and there's more. People with disabilities and their families don't walk or wheel alone. It's really a ripple effect. Factor in 25% of Nova Scotians who interact daily with persons with disabilities, and the 30% of Nova Scotians that interact weekly with someone with a disability. Well, that's over 50% of our population making choices daily on accessible services and the built environment. Can we eat in a restaurant together? Can we shop at this store together? Can we stay in this hotel together? And this number is only going to grow. We talk about, and we talk about a population growth that's important. It's an important sort of sort of population growth and the importance of it. And I think I'm going to get Carolyn to go to the next slide. Thanks, Carolyn. So Stats Canada breaks down two cohorts of growth, 64 and under. Well, we're a declining population, and this is the population our communities and services were mostly designed for. The growth, however, is in the 65 plus cohort. Implications are huge. With older adults comes more disabilities, and as well, the need and the interest to age in place, at home, in community, close to businesses will only increase in the years to come. So it's clear the implications and the opportunities for business to be accessible are significant. And by achieving an accessible Nova Scotia, we open opportunities up for businesses to thrive. When persons with disabilities participate fully in all aspects of their community, including accessing employment and services, it enriches our economy. Persons with disabilities and their allies are a growing consumer market that businesses can tap into and cannot afford to ignore. So I'll ask Carolyn to go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So in 2017, Nova Scotia passed the Accessibility Act and became the third province to adopt accessibility legislation. One of the most important things that happened, and a key element of the Accessibility Act, is the policy shift from being a social service to a social justice matter. The Act makes it very clear. This is not about accommodation, and it's not about being tolerant. Recognition that accessibility is a human right for persons with disabilities is enshrined in legislation, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the United Nations Convention. It's been 3 years since the Act was passed, and we are 9 years away from our commitment of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030, and the Act sets that goal. 9 years, it sounds like a long time, but we know it's not. And we've been making good progress, but there's still so much to do. So here's a little bit of information about kind of, what's been created as a result of the Act and what's included in the Act. First of all, the Accessibility Directorate, which Carolyn and I and Josh work at. This was established under the Accessibility Act, and it's an office within the Department of Justice, and it's responsible for implementation of the Act. We're a small dynamic team that started with one person, and now we're 15 full-time, part-time staff, and we're mainly policy analysts. Our work is guided by a number of key principles, including, not limited to, collaboration and engagement with persons with disabilities and first voice. And the Act is based on the premise that in Nova Scotia, we'll achieve accessibility by preventing and removing barriers to accessibility. Often when people think about barriers, they picture a physical barrier such as a doorway that is too small for a wheelchair to fit through, but there's many other types of barriers. For example, print that is too small to read, or public signage that is not clear or easy to understand would be an example of information or communication barrier. A website that doesn't support screen reading software, well, that would be an example of technological barrier. And assuming a person with a disability can't understand you would be an example of an attitudinal barrier. So one way, it really is a multi-pronged approach, is that we will prevent and remove barriers through the development and implementation of standards in the following areas. Built environment, well, that's about buildings and streets and sidewalks and parks and recreation space. And it's really been focused on addressing gaps in current regulations. There's going to be standards in education, and this will help create learning environments in which all students can participate. Employment, standards in this area will range from recruitment, career advancement, meaningful employment. Goods and services, well, that's really about how we as service providers interact with persons with disabilities, train our staff, make documents available, the placement of goods. Then we have information and communications. Well, this is going to be about accessible formats of communication like websites and large print materials. And then public transportation and transportation infrastructure, making it easier for everyone to get where they want to go. So clearly, From the 6 standards that I've just listed, it's clearly not just about the built environment. I'll get Carolyn to go to the next slide. So what keeps us on track in government with our partners at the Accessibility Directorate? Well, 3 years ago, government brought forward 2 key policy documents, and they're available on our website, Access by Design, and that's the implementation strategy for the Accessibility Act, for how the province, not just government, but everybody, how the province will achieve a goal of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. And the second document is the Government of Nova Scotia Plan. And it's our first 3-year accessibility plan as a government of Nova Scotia. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's called prescribed public sector bodies. So whether you're a museum or a library or a municipality, we're just like those prescribed bodies. The Government of Nova Scotia is required to have 3-year action plans. And so these 2 documents really guide us. And I'll go to the next slide, Carolyn. So in these documents, the 2 combined, there's over 40 commitments to advancing accessibility. And the business community, I'm pleased to say, is well represented in the work that is ongoing and that we're doing, represented on our Compliance and Enforcement Working Group, on the Built Environment Standard Development Committee, on the Accessibility Advisory Board. And I'll go to the next slide. So what do you need to consider about the obligations under the Accessibility Act, and what does it mean for businesses, in addition to accessibility being an opportunity? Well, I think you need to be considering the accessibility standards and partnership and collaboration. So the Act requires us to develop the 6 standards that I've just mentioned, and we're well underway with developing 2 of the standard areas, in the built environment and in education. So we will begin to develop the 4 remaining standards, so goods and services, information, communication, technology, and employment, 1 standard area a year starting this year in 2021. And it does take approximately 3 years to kind of start with the research and the committee forming to advancing recommendations for regulations to government. Businesses not under federal regulations will be required to comply with the Nova Scotia accessibility standards when enacted. So let's just take a quick look at the built environment in education. So recommendations for the built environment standards were advanced by the Accessibility Advisory Board in August, just this past summer, and those recommendations have been made available publicly. They are available on the Accessibility Directorate website. And they include recommendations, a whole suite of recommendations in the areas of parking, pedestrian facilities like street furniture, exterior approaches like buildings being well lit, emergency systems, site selection, wayfinding, washrooms, interiors, housing, and parks and recreation. So the Minister of Justice has tasked now that he's received these recommendations, he's tasked an interdepartmental working group made up of solicitors and policy advisors and domain experts to review all the recommendations and draft regulations, conduct the impact assessments, do consultation, and develop implementation plans. So these standards will be enacted in a phased-in approach beginning in 2022. And we hope that consultation, and there'll be a significant amount of consultation, will begin this fall. So again, just hope you'll watch for that and participate. As it relates to the education standards, which is the other piece of work that's well underway, of course, we're designing standards to ensure meaningful participation of all learners and to ensure policies and programs are inclusive and responsive. So you may be wondering, well, how does education standards relate to businesses? Well, if you're a career college or a language school or connected to a private school, the education standards will apply. What's significant here is we're the first jurisdiction to develop accessibility education standards, and we anticipate, again, they'll go through a process of more consultation and whatnot, and we're aiming there for an enactment in fall of 2023. So when standards roll out, the focus will be on awareness and education. So there'll be lots of that and capacity building, of course. There will be an implementation plan You'll be able to provide feedback on that during the consultation process, and there will be a responsive compliance and enforcement framework, again, focused on education. And then finally, the second area that I felt was important to consider today was partnership and collaboration. So again, there's many prescribed public sector bodies that are required under the Accessibility Act to establish accessibility advisory committees and prepare and make publicly available an accessibility plan with input from the disability community. And although businesses are not prescribed, we're eager to establish partnerships with the business community. We would love to support some prototypes, areas of research, and we encourage you to get involved with your local accessibility committee. So HRM would have an accessibility committee, and they just advance their accessibility plan, and they would be prescribed, as I just mentioned. So a great resource of experts and first voice, as well as the recent plan that they brought forward. So the overview that I've provided is at a high level, and I just want to assure you the time for discussion after our presentations, but also the Accessibility Directorate website has many resources and webinars that you can access after today. And the staff at the Directorate would be pleased, of course, to follow up with you for further discussion after today's webinar as well. So thanks very much, and I'll pass it back to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Very much appreciate that. It's a great start, very interesting. Thank you. Now, next up, we have Jessica Ward, Project Manager, National Accessibility Week, Nova Scotia Coordinator with reachAbility. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm always a little in awe after hearing Dawn speak. She knows I'm a big fan of the Accessibility Directorate. I'm really happy to be here today and talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available for businesses. I really liked how Dawn started by saying that we definitely understand as a community around accessibility, right now, we definitely understand that the pressures and the hardships that businesses have experienced due to COVID, and that their reopening plans are coming, and that there's a lot of increased anxiety. So I loved how she started by saying, and I want to reiterate that point, that we're only expected to know what we know. And we understand that with the new legislation coming in and with the standards rolling out, there's probably a lot of pressure that businesses are feeling. But there are organizations like the Accessibility Directorate, also like reachAbility Association, that are here to work with small to medium businesses and other organizations as they try to move through these expectations that are coming out, and as they're trying to learn as to what that means. So what I'm really happy to be here to talk quickly about is some of the resources that are available for businesses, and also to talk about how our agency, reachAbility, is working with businesses across Nova Scotia to help support them through some of these changes, mainly around training, but also around providing some other accessibility services. So before I get into talking about training, I wanted to quickly review some of the resources that we share with our business partners who come to us saying, we realize that there are legislations coming out. We realize that we want to put our best foot forward and get ahead of the curve before it actually becomes legislation that we are the ones that are being watched to get these things done. We want to start getting moving so that we can make changes as we're going through these transitions. And the first thing that always comes up is finances, because there's a lot of need for built environment changes, training, accommodations when it comes to providing accessible services and all those things. The first thing when it comes to business, the first thought is, this is going to cost me money. So, and what I love about the provincial government is that they immediately put something in place to help businesses do this when they brought out the legislation. So there are a few different streams of financial support that businesses can access. So the first one that I wanted to mention is the Business Accessibility Grant Program. And that is offered through the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, where they will cover up to 66% of eligible expenses. So if you are a business and you realize that maybe you need to have a new door put in with a button, or you need a ramp, or possibly you're looking to to get some support in creating more accessible communication, having your website redone so that it is more accessible for screen readers, you can go through one of these funding programs. So there is the Business Accessibility Grant Program that is available to businesses, and I can make sure that we have that website available, or you can go on to cch.novascotia.ca and you'll be able to find the link there for the Business Accessibility Grant. Now that covers things like built environment, as I mentioned, with construction and renovation projects, accessible communications. So that can be, as I said, redoing a website or having accessible web design, accessible signage, and also assistive technologies. So that can go, there is an expense cap of up to $30,000 for the accessible communication grants. But again, the government will cover up to 66% of those eligible expenses. And we are hearing a lot about needing to have accessible communication, especially because that is one of the standards that the accessibility legislation is going to be focusing on. But in these days, especially with COVID, everything is online. And as Dawn said, there are over half of the population of Nova Scotia that either live with disability or have a relationship to disability. So if your communication, if your website or your services are not accessible, you are missing out on over half of the population of Nova Scotia. So this is a really big hot topic that we've been hearing a lot about. And I love that these services or these financial resources are available through that program. It also covers some assistive devices, and that could be the purchase and installation of assistive devices, whether you needed a lift to be put in because you couldn't accommodate an elevator, or if you wanted to be able to provide assistive devices to employees. That funding is also available through the Business Accessibility Grant, and it also has a stream available for accessible transportation. Again, that can be found on the CCH, or the Community Culture and Heritage website. I also wanted to quickly mention about the Community Accessibility Grant Program. That's community funding through that program, and it is from the province of Nova Scotia, and it's providing equal opportunity and improved access to community facilities. So this is for improvements for community halls, meeting facilities, libraries, parks and playgrounds, and those types of things. Again, it covers up to 66% of eligible expenses, and there is a cap per project. I also just wanted to mention that through the WIPC program, it's an acronym for Workplace Innovation, Productivity, and Skills Incentive. Big, long word, but I promise if you Google WIPC, W-I-P-S-I, you will find that. And it is a program that we love to recommend to folks because it can cover eligible expenses for training. And we are huge on training at reachAbility, not only because it's one of the services that we offer, but as I mentioned, we are firm believers that you don't know what you don't know. And we can't expect people to understand about disability if it's something that they are not used to. And we definitely don't want people to go on the assumptions that they've got from their community or their upbringing. We really want people to understand the ease of accommodation, what disability means, and the fact that everybody at some point in their life is going to have had, or will have a disability. So we really encourage people and businesses, large or small, to really reach out and get some training so that they can have a really strong foundation to start with. It's a great team builder. And when your group or your team understands why the need for being accessible is there, it just makes everything a lot easier. It helps to reduce a lot of the anxiety about the changes and the things that are coming your way. And it helps to build a really great feeling and culture within your business. At reachAbility, we have been providing training for over 20 years. It's through our inclusion and action services, for which I am very involved in. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on, because we are working with the Accessibility Directorate on a variety of different levels. And so we've worked with a number of different agencies, but I really wanted to focus on the training that we're able to do for small to medium business and what would fall into what you may require. So I'm going to do a little shameless plug, as it is National Accessibility Week. And as Patrick mentioned, reachAbility is the host for National Accessibility Week here in Nova Scotia. And we have a week-long conference happening right now, talking about accessibility and inclusion for everyone and highlighting the number of agencies and amazing things that are happening right here in our province and beyond. And on Friday, June 4th at 10 a.m., we will be providing a workshop very similar to this platform called Opening Doors for Everyone. Thank you for sharing that, Kayla, and the links. I see that pop up. We're providing a workshop called Opening Doors for Everyone, which many of you have probably already taken part in at some point over the past few years. We worked very closely with Communities, Culture, and Heritage to create a roadshow workshop where we traveled around Nova Scotia and gave a free accessibility workshop to businesses. We reached out and were able to connect with over 1,000 businesses. So we know first and foremost that Nova Scotia is totally on board with becoming accessible and wanting to learn about what the next steps are. We have updated that presentation and we'll be having that workshop on Friday at 10 a.m. So we encourage you to tune in. As with all of our National Accessibility Week workshops, they're all free and available online. And the link was provided in the chat, but you could also just go to our reachability.org website and /NAAW, N-A-A-W, and you'll be able to see all the information in the live stream right there. Through our Opening Doors for Everyone workshop, we provide a very plain language overview of the accessibility legislation, as Dawn just did very nicely. We also talk about terminology, definitions, accommodation, and again, we provide some resources around the grants and training that are available. We are also able to meet with businesses one-on-one to talk about the training that you require. Some people are at different places. I personally am a person that lives with a disability. I have children who have disabilities, so I'm very comfortable being in this space, and that's okay that other people are not being in as comfortable in the disability space. But as I mentioned, training, especially within your business and providing that leadership, will give not only your team, your employees, the understanding that this is what's important to you, but by creating a very open and welcoming space within your business, your clients, your audience is going to feel more comfortable and more safe within your space. And as Dawn mentioned, and I mentioned a little while ago, if you open your doors, pardon the pun, to everyone, and you are accessible to everyone, just think of the amount of people that you're going to be welcoming into your space. And on the flip side of that, if you think about not being accessible, I can remember when I had small children, without those buttons on the doors, there were a lot of stores that I could not get into with my stroller and children in tow. I think if we think of COVID-19 right now, we're probably all hitting those buttons with our elbows so that we're not having to touch the door handles. So if we can shift our thinking from, making accessibility changes because we're being told to making accessibility changes because it's the right thing to do for everybody, I think we're going to be in a really great space. And we are well on our way to having that accessible culture here within Nova Scotia. So I just want to end by saying that if you have any questions about training or any of the resource options, I know that Josh is here behind the scenes, so I'll defer financial funding questions to him. But if you want an agency that works within the community that is here to support businesses and also supports people with disabilities, please reach out to reachAbility. We're here to support you alongside the Accessibility Directorate, and we're just really proud to be a part of a province that's taken this step to moving accessibility forward.
Wow. Thank you, Jessica. You must be having a quiet week this week. Are you, Jessica? Is this a quiet week for you?
I've actually been napping all week.
Have you?
It's actually not. We absolutely love being host of National Accessibility Week. And, we kind of feel like we host it year round because we're cheerleaders in this space and trying to bring awareness to everybody that we can. But we're definitely busy and happily so.
Well, that's great. And I did click on the link that Kayla provided on your events for the rest of the week. And I see you even have one tonight from 5:30 to 6 with Dorico Simmons. So a start tonight, and then it looks like you've got 2 and 3 every day actually for the next little while. So congratulations on that, and it'll be great to attend some of those additional events. I'm going to jump right into the questions. I do want to say, Jessica, one more thing, I guess, and that is you also talked about the grant programs, and Kayla put a link up for that. So that's really important. I clicked on that as well, and there are lots of programs, and there's programs there that people don't think of. I don't think, even and funding for things like automatic door openers or additional, elevators may be something that they would think of, paving for parking and to improve accessibility to get into a building. So I'm looking at all of the groups or organizations that received grants last year, and it's quite a varied spectrum. So I guess there's all kinds of things you should be applying for given these programs. Is that true?
That is true. And I always encourage people to get in and apply because we're always there to say, well, the government's not helping us, but they put the money there. And so they're saying, like, we put this aside, we've made this a priority, and we want businesses to do the same. So, and again, the Accessibility Directorate, they have great people there helping. So if anybody has questions about those, you can reach out. I know they'll mention that later, but they can definitely reach out to the Directorate or us if that's how they would feel more comfortable. But yes, get in and apply for that funding. We want the money to be spent.
Well, yes, and I think we want it to be spent too. And let's not wait till 2030 when there'll suddenly be a rush. Let's do it now. And in fact, and I'm going to ask you a question about this, Don, I guess, but in fact, we've done exactly that. So we felt our office was quite accessible. We believed it was accessible, but we had an evaluation done, and we found that although you could get into the office, and although we were on one floor and those things were all good, our washrooms were not accessible. So we did actually apply for funding to improve our washrooms. And I think we were to receive 2/3 of the funding to improve our washrooms, which was amazing. So Don, I'm gonna jump to you. I think with this first question, can you tell us what perhaps your 2 or 3 priorities for short or long-term action for the chamber and for our members around accessibility and in the business community and not-for-profit community?
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. And I do want to just comment that on the grant program, we were talking to our colleagues at Communities, Culture and Heritage just last week, and I understand that the budget for this year is $1 million. They have 400,000 approximately committed, another 600,000 that's available for grants, and and definitely this is money that needs to be spent this fiscal year. So they really, the window right now to apply is probably between now and late fall, because the projects would have to be done by March 31st. So yeah, a really great opportunity to kind of get in there and talk to Wayne Matheson, their grant coordinator for that program. But in terms of those 2 or 3 priorities, I think what comes to mind for me is education would be the first thing. It's always kind of that first step that can really make a difference. And so I would encourage nonprofits and the business community to take advantage of all the education that's available, whether it's sort of a one-on-one consultant or if it's about a webinar that you sort of participate in. But whether it be through all the disability organizations from reachAbility to Easter Seals to NSLEO to even contacting the Directorate, we can guide you to where that training is available and where those experts are. The other thing would be to connect and get engaged in your community. So those municipal accessibility plans that I mentioned, I think what a great opportunity for the chamber or its members to link to that committee, learn about the plan and sort of find the synergies and the opportunities and get involved with that work. And of course, half of those committees would be representative of First Voice persons with disabilities, and so important in any kind of assessment that a business does or plans that they're thinking about doing around removing barriers. Involve First Voice in those conversations and get their perspective of the space or of the communications changes you want to make. And of course, the other thing would be like sort of start taking action. You don't have to wait for the standards to be enacted. And you may sort of see an opportunity in your business community. So, an example that I'll just sort of pull out of my hat would be, so if it was tourism, maybe there's something that the tourism sector wants to do related to outdoor festivals. And together they kind of create that energy around how could they make that accessible and sort of create kind of some energy and movement in that one area, and then kind of go from there.
That's great. Thank you. And I couldn't have put it better myself. I think, how do we get the business community involved? How do they start to recognize? How do they educate? How do they participate? Joanne Bernard, you mentioned Easter seals. Joanne Bernard put a comment in the chat function, and she said it's also very important to ask business owners, what is the cost to you to not have persons with disabilities not be able to access your products and services with their families? And I did, again, I'm sort of going back to the grant recipients, and maybe this isn't a good example for families, but I see Good Robot Brewing got a grant for accessibility upgrades for automated doors. So clearly they're recognizing, that they want to appeal to everyone to get into their facility. So Jessica, maybe I could ask you the same question. I mean, are there 2 or 3 things that you think the chamber or our businesses, not-for-profits, should be doing as we around accessibility as we move forward?
Well, I see a great example today, Patrick, is that you're making this space accessible to everyone by having an ASL interpreter and closed captioning available. I think leading by example in that space is really, really important. We try to always get the message across that it's not about having a special accommodation. It's just about providing equity and making a space accessible to everyone. So that leading by example is really important, in that I'm not aware if this is a service that you provide for all of your webinars and your workshops, but I would certainly implore you to do so if you don't, to make that your policy, to always have anything that's public, to have that service, or to at least say, not in small print, but in large print, that you are able to provide accessibility services if they're requested. And then that way we're not exhausting the resources, because they know that ASL interpretation is very few and far between, and we appreciate them so much because there are not a lot of skilled interpreters around. So that would be the first thing, is leading by example, and I think Halifax Chamber does that a lot. And so through the learning that you provide your members, because you're always offering free learning options. I've come to many. I can't wait till we can do lunch and learns again. But I think that resource is really important, especially to your clientele. So I would definitely encourage more learning, and definitely maybe make it part of your policy that more of that learning is around accessibility and inclusion and in that space, because it is really just a matter of people don't know. It's foreign to them. They don't understand. And we don't like to talk about sensitivity training because we don't feel that people are being insensitive. We really just think that people don't know. And so getting that information out there is the best. And again, the community engagement, that's one of the best ways to learn. I mentioned that I'm a person with a disability, but I also have children who have disabilities. So I'm quite comfortable in that space. So if businesses and organizations aren't already working with community organizations, whether that's through volunteerism or being on a board, then I agree that that is another way to get that learning, that you learn through osmosis. Our CEO always talks about education and osmosis. So you can get the education through learning, and you can also get it by absorbing it, by being around it more often. The more familiar you are with something, the more comfortable you'll be. So that would be my 2 things.
Well, that's great. And I think what the last year or year and a bit has shown us is that we can do things differently. We used to just put a person up on a stage. We have now put them on Zoom. But frankly, it's easier now utilizing some of the technology to have our sign language interpreters available in the screen, easy to see, for people who need to use that service, as well as the closed captioning. We're still always learning. I appreciate you saying that, people aren't being insensitive, because I do think in a lot of cases people just don't know. We began to advertise this event. We put it on Twitter, and we actually had people correctly kind of call us out and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't totally accessible on Twitter. You need to describe what's in the image. You need to describe what's there so that people can utilize the technology to actually read this if they have a visual disability. And we learned, and now we're doing that. We've now kind of signed up for an automated system that will help to further communicate our advocacy, I suppose, and our events. So we're always learning, absolutely always learning. And I don't want this to be about the chamber, but I just feel I have to say this. And I did mention Joanne. Joanne's on our board, so thank you, Joanne. We were working on our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, and Joanne correctly said, and you need to include accessibility. And we changed it, and we now have accessibility as part of that diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And I think it's made it a much better plan. So thanks, Joanne, and thanks to the folks inside the chamber that have been working on that. Don, what do you hope will be different in the coming year, I suppose, in the future years, for the business community's awareness or action around some of these things?
Well, definitely, if I think long term, things that come to mind for me is, again, we'll start to see the Directorate in the government will have the standards enacted, and we'll have a kind of a multi-pronged approach with a strong awareness campaign, and all those pieces will be there for people to have what they need to start understanding the change that's needed. But we'll start to see maybe less human rights complaints. I mean, there's an indicator right there. There's a lot that of the complaints that come into the Human Rights Commission are from persons with disabilities, are employment related. That we'll see that persons with disabilities are supported to participate fully in their community. And again, what we're talking about, and Patrick, you're talking about it so well, which is a universal design approach, which is about building it for everybody to be accessible, and so everybody benefits. It's also a place where abilities vary, but our capacity to participate is not limited by barriers anymore. And so again, it is that, and then of course, one of the important indicators with all of this is that, and Joanne spoke about in the chat, is we will see businesses thrive, and we'll be measuring that and showing that by not all accessibility improvements or removals of barriers cost a lot of money. In fact, if you build it at the beginning, it's minimal. And then there is so much more than just the built environment. And so how do we measure that and get that message out and learn from one another? I hope that in a year from now, the members of the Chamber of Commerce are doing so much that we're celebrating and we're sharing those successes with other jurisdictions and with other communities.
Great. Dawn, I want to sort of stick with you for a second and ask you a hard question. The question that I'm often posed, I suppose, when we talk about the Act and the changes by 2030. There are people who say Halifax is an old city, will never be totally accessible. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, well, and this is where I'll probably bring Josh Bates on, because Josh is, of course, involved with our compliance and enforcement work, and there is undue hardship that gets discussed in those conversations. And I think that's an element of maybe what's being asked here. But again, it really comes to the, I think we've tried to sort of communicate today, the opportunity for businesses is significant. And of course, coming out of the pandemic in particular, we want to build back better. And the funding support is there for the business community right since 2017 through the Business Accessibility Grant Program. But again, you're right, it's an old city, and definitely undue hardship and alternative approaches are being considered when we look at how regs will be developed and how those implementation plans will move forward. So I'll probably, if I can get in the Zoom universe, if Josh Bates or Carolyn Reed Kendall, who both deal with compliance and enforcement and the built environment, want to jump in, I'll suggest that they do at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Don, for pitching the tough question to me and Carolyn. And oh, my daughter's just waking up. She took a cue from Jessica, and I guess is napping all week. Yeah, so we talk about a fully accessible Nova Scotia. You know, this might be disappointing to some people, but that does not literally mean that every single building is going to be accessible to every single person by 2030. So I might defer to Carolyn on this as well, because in the regulations, I know that there are going to be exemptions. So Carolyn's working on the Built Environment Standard Development Committee and helping to form those regulations with her committee. Yeah, we know that there are some old buildings, and we know, of course, that there's a building code that does not apply retroactively. So, of course, you know, an example would be a business that's on the second floor that doesn't have an elevator. It would be hugely expensive to add that elevator. So there's going to be a process to look at perhaps some businesses that could be exempt. There's going to have to be a process involved with that, but that's going to be in the Built Environment Standard itself for that particular regulation. So Carolyn, if there's anything you want to add to that, then I'll be happy to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Josh. And I see we're tight on time, so I'll be quick. But so the Built Environment Standard Development Committee is proposing a package of regulatory and non-regulatory amendments. So some would be building code amendments, some would be net new regulations, and then there would also be accompanying guidelines to assist with capacity building and information sharing. And so we know that the building code is forward-facing only, that no building code amendment can be retroactive and isn't able to be under the building code. So you know, there's not going to be a big push to have every building make themselves accessible by 2030. But what there is going to be is, you know, encouragement through when you do a renovation, you're going to have to do some accessibility upgrades at the same time. And you know, any new building would have to be built accessibly. And then we will be working with municipalities and villages and other prescribed public sector bodies to include accessibility upgrades in their municipal accessibility plans going forward. So there's lots of different ways we can do it, knowing that, you know, no, not every building in Nova Scotia is going to be accessible by 2030, but we do anticipate that there will be lots of improvements made, and we'll work with community and with business to make those happen.
That's great. Thanks, Carolyn and Josh. Appreciate that. I'm going to jump into the Q&A. So if anybody has any other Q&As, please throw them up there. Just a couple of comments. Colin mentioned that Smarter Spaces is involved in a lot of projects for fire safety plans and evacuation mapping. And please remember, if you're making changes to your space, that you consider that they may affect your fire plans. So please remember that. Michelle mentioned that she was speaking to the owner of the Middle Spoon in Bedford and told her about the funding to make their establishment more accessible and accessible buttons at the entrance. And I bet she was excited about that. And then Randy, who I think Randy said is actually from New Brunswick and is on the Premier's Advisory Committee there, said important to point out that businesses that are accessible not only get more customers with disabilities, but also their relatives, friends, and neighbors, thereby increasing market share. Furthermore, having more accessibility means more opportunities for hiring persons with disabilities in that accessible venue, opening up possibilities for wage subsidies, oh, there's something, as well as jobs for persons with disabilities. So those are all great comments. Jessica, back to you. We think about physical accessibility. What about digital accessibility? We may have touched on that a little bit, but is there more you can tell us?
Well, I think even you mentioned with your Twitter experience that there's always something that we can do to learn. And what we have been finding most useful is to reach out to people who have disabilities and to have them let us know what it is that we're doing right and what it is that we need to improve. Because, you know, I can do image descriptions. We can do descriptive audio. We can work on doing all of that, and there's still going to be things to learn. So we try to focus on things that we can do and do the best at that, and communicating of what we can't do. And I think just because I was really hard for me to keep quiet when you were all answering that previous question, I just want to say that if we're not able to be accessible, what's most important is to make it so that people can make informed decisions. So let us be, communicating effectively, which also goes with this digital accessibility question, Patrick, and let us be communicating so that people with disabilities can make informed decisions. Let me be able to know if there isn't a quiet space before I go somewhere with my son who has autism, if we need to be able to have that. Let your audience or your clients or your customers know that you only have one level of your 3-story building that's accessible. We've been doing a lot of engagement with the tourism sector right now as we're trying to do a little bit of research and find out what it is that they're needing. And that's the first thing we get is, I've got an Airbnb that's a century home and there's no way I can be accessible. Okay, accessibility is not only physical, right? I'm going to quote my CEO again, and I'm sure she's just like sitting there chomping at the bit, but we can remove all the architectural barriers in the world. The attitudinal ones are still going to be there, right? So we need to address that. And there's a lot of things that we can do to make or to allow or to empower people with disabilities to make informed decisions. And digital communication is one of the ways that we can do that by having our digital platforms accessible so that visually impaired people, hearing impaired people, even for the federal government and the provincial governments, they're starting to provide plain language text because policies can be really, really hard to understand. So that's all a part of accessibility, and all of our information lives online, right? Everything is technology driven right now, especially because of the pandemic that we've been faced with. So let us not create more barriers, because we know that during the pandemic, people with disabilities were the ones who faced the most barriers. All the barriers that they had, they just multiplied. And what it did was, by not having digital accessibility, was made that worse. But it also, on the flip side, allowed all of us to see what it is like to be a person with a disability, because we've all been facing social isolation, and we've all been facing, a lack of community engagement. And so let's use what we've learned to make digital accessibility better. Some organizations are going and getting the I hate saying the acronym, the WCAG certification. Some organization, which is like the legislated kind of standard right now. Other people will tell you that that's nowhere near good enough. But let's just do what we can, and don't say that we were perfect, and just say we're continuing to learn. We're just going to continue to do better.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that's my 2 cents. It's especially when it comes to digital, because it's always changing. We're not going to be perfection, right? We're looking for progress. That's where I think we are.
Yeah, and I think that, I think the thing people often forget about the internet is it's temporary. So you can change your website, and you can change your Facebook post, and you can let people know when you have changes, or when you change your architecture, if I could put it that way, but also when you change the non-physical environment that I think you were just talking about as well, Jessica. I mean, if a grocery store was to do a quiet time for people to shop with their children who may have autism, if that's something that the parent is interested in, they can just put it out there, I think, can't they? I mean, is that something that reachAbility would help with?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at Sobeys. Sobeys has their sensory hour, and a lot of businesses will say, well, no one's asked me for that. Don't make them ask. Right. It's, you dim the lights, you turn down some of the sounds. Sobeys is a great example of that. I think they started in Forest Hills over Paul, who's won a number of awards for being an inclusive and accessible employer. But just look at what other people are doing. No one's expecting you to reinvent the wheel, but something like that is really simple. It's the same as how you'll see that some stores are doing like senior shopping, that they open at 7 to 8 a.m. to allow seniors to come, because they're anything like my grandparents, they're up at 5 o'clock having tea, but then they can get out before the hustle and bustle of time. And it's not because they're asking to be special. It's just, you have these clientele, as Don said, and as I mentioned, we're all going to have a disability. We're all getting older if we're fortunate enough to do so. And our province has the highest ratio of seniors in the entire country, right? There's no coincidence that we have the highest ratio of people with disabilities, the highest ratio of seniors, right? So we need to start figuring out how we can continue to engage this population that we have that's not getting any younger. So yeah, I mean, the sensory hour is a great thing. Just even switching over to LED lighting instead of having the old-fashioned lighting. There's a lot of things that you can do that are very simple. Just having signs up that are at appropriate heights and saying, like, we apologize, this room is not accessible, so that people don't have to try to get in there and not be able to use it, right? Like, let's allow people with disabilities to have a little bit of dignity.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so I think Moisen wants to post their time of their meeting. If they want to post a monthly meetup, sure, go right ahead. And Don, for you, I think a quick question regarding fire evacuation plans for schools. Where might one look up this information?
Yeah, and it's kind of one of these pop-up things. First of all, we're going to pass that question over to Carolyn because she's our lead on built environment, but it just showed Jerry Post, the inaugural executive director for the Accessibility Directorate, just knocked on my door during the panel. So I just wanted to, I'm sure many people on today's participants will know Jerry for the great work that he's done. So we'll pass the question over to Carolyn, who's ready to go.
Hi, thanks. That's a great question about fire plans. So the Built Environment Standard Development Committee actually recently had a meeting with the Fire Marshal's office, and the Fire Marshal himself was there, and we were talking about this issue. So the fire code speaks to who needs evacuation plans. The fire code also speaks to what buildings are required to have areas of refuge for persons to wait, and all of the information that you need is available, I think, in the fire code. If you have a specific question, because without knowing your building size and type and all of that information, I can't really answer what's required. But feel free to reach out to me, and if I don't have the answer, I can put you in touch with Fire Marshal. Thanks.
Okay. And Don, you're sure your office isn't too accessible in that Jerry can just drop by anytime? Is that?
Yes, that's right. The security guards aren't doing their job today.
I think that's okay. That's all right. Well, listen, this has been amazing. I want to give each of you a quick opportunity to kind of wrap up. So Jessica, I'll go to you first because we're running out of time.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me today. And again, another plug, we are providing workshops all week long for National Accessibility Week. And you can find them. I'll put them in the chat at reachability.org/NAAW. And hi, Jerry. Nice to see you.
And Don?
Yeah, no, once again, many thanks for taking the time today to discuss this important issue. Just want to put a plug in for two things. One is the Directorate, the government will be launching an awareness campaign this summer. We hope that when you see it, you'll want to use it as a business. And also the third standard will be announced soon. And when you see the opportunity to get involved with the development committee, standard development committee for that third standard, again, we encourage members of the chamber to consider that opportunity.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I see I'm looking at the Q&A again, and I see Michelle has said that she took the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification course and wants to get involved. She's completing the national exam. And I think that's actually one of the last times I saw Jerry, because I think there's no time before the pandemic was actually when Rick Hansen was in Halifax. And I brought the CNIB dog that we were raising at the time to the event, and that CNIB dog is now a guide dog, and in Vancouver with its handler, a visually impaired person. So that was great to see you then, Jerry. It's great to see you now. We're coming to the end of the time. I want to thank again Nova Scotia Business Inc. for supporting today's event. Thank you, Jessica, Dawn, Josh, everybody, Carolyn, everyone. I particularly want to thank Jess and Karina for their great interpretation. Thank you very much. This is an extremely important topic that we all need to learn more about. We so appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I think we've really only scratched the surface. So we will be able to dive into this again. The event has been recorded and will be made available to all attendees, and then you can forward it as well. And if you would like more information, check out National Accessibility Week events this week at reachability.org/NAAW. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great week, everyone. And look forward to seeing you all on a patio, if that's possible, or somewhere in the future as we get away from COVID and we're all feeling a little bit better. So thank you all. Bye-bye.
We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kmahi, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are honored to work and serve on this land. We stand with the protesters across Canada and the globe demanding an end to racism, discrimination, and violence. We acknowledge the deep and powerful challenges faced by all marginalized communities in Nova Scotia, Canada, and beyond. Good afternoon. Welcome to National Accessibility Week. My name is Jessica Ward. I am the Program and Project Manager with reachAbility. reachAbility is proud to be the Nova Scotia host for National Accessibility Week, and we have some members of the Accessibility Directorate of Nova Scotia here. Today, we're going to get an opportunity to meet a few of those members and to learn some more about the Accessibility Directorate and their role within Nova Scotia and the different standard developments that are being made. So I'd like to welcome everybody here. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Dawn Stegan.
Hi, everybody. Dawn Stegan. I'm the Interim Executive Director at the Accessibility Directorate, and pleased to be here today to talk to you about the work of the Directorate and provide an update on the progress government has made to meet its commitments to improve accessibility in Nova Scotia with Nova Scotia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Bezanson, and I'm the Program Coordinator with the Accessibility Directorate. And I'm really excited to be here. And thanks to reachAbility for inviting us to participate in this discussion today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Lynn Almeida, and I'm the Manager at the Accessibility Directorate. And really pleased to be here and talk a bit about our work at the Accessibility Directorate today.
Thank you so much. And again, really excited to have everyone here as reachAbility is quite active with the members of the public, and we get a lot of questions about what the Accessibility Directorate does, what this new legislation, Bill 59 and Access by Design 2030 means. So we're really excited to get to the nitty-gritty and be able to meet the Directorate and hear about what it is that you folks are up to. So I would like to ask Dawn a few questions. And I thank you for allowing me to do so. I think we're going to really break down what the Accessibility Directorate does in a way that people can really understand. So I'm really curious, what are the biggest misconceptions that you hear about the Accessibility Directorate?
So thank you. That's a very interesting question. And maybe before I get to what we think are maybe some of the misconceptions, let me do a bit of a backtrack and talk a bit about the Act and the work that we do at the Directorate. So the Directorate is responsible for the Accessibility Act, and the Act is really about the goal of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. And it will only succeed with the commitments of all of us across government and our partners, including reachAbility. And it is a critical time for our work in accessibility. And so, the Act was passed in 2017, and we were the third province to adopt accessibility legislation. And we're going to do that by achieving accessibility, by preventing and removing barriers to accessibility. And it's important to note that it's been around 3.5 years since the Act was passed. So that means we only have, it's 2021, and we have only 9 years, we're 9 years away from our commitment to an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. It may seem like a long time, but it really isn't. And because the work that we're doing with our partners is societal change, it's transformational. And so, I think, many people understand why this work is important, but it sometimes goes beyond it being a human right, because there are many reasons why this work is important, and that includes that by achieving an accessible Nova Scotia, we open up opportunities for businesses and communities to thrive, for all people to participate in society. And a little bit about the Directorate. We're a small but mighty team. We're a dynamic team, and we're responsible for two things: for implementing and administering the Act across government and all sectors, and also addressing and advancing those broader disability issues within government. And the second part of our mandate has become even more important this year with the impact of COVID-19 on Nova Scotians with disabilities. 3 years ago, government brought forward two key policy documents that the Directorate developed on behalf of all government and with its partners. Access by Design 2030, which is the implementation strategy for the Act, and the first 3-year accessibility plan for government. And you put those two documents together, and there's over 40 commitments to advance accessibility. And we also have a commitment to report on those annually. And, Access by Design has a number of priorities related to standard development, awareness, collaboration, compliance and enforcement is an important piece. Of course, we have to monitor our progress, and Government by Nova Scotia is a priority within that strategy as well, because we need to lead by example. And then the Government of Nova Scotia Accessibility Plan, well, we're the first public sector body prescribed by the Act. And so we are a leader in accessibility, and that's the direction we're going in. We're the largest service provider in the province, and we have that leadership role to play to make Nova Scotia barrier-free. And so we work across departments to meet the commitments in that plan. And we're really pleased with the efforts that have been made across government. And so I think that, some of what I've said gets to those myths or misconceptions. And one being that sometimes people think of us as having programs and services like grants. We're not an operations or a program service kind of division within government. We're actually focused on regulatory and policy development. And so that could be a surprise to folks. And, I've been in government for over 10 years. I was in the nonprofit sector for 20 some, and I really think that policy work is where we can make systemic change, and it's big work, but very important for lasting change. The other thing is, folks may think that we're really, really big in terms of staff. That's what they sometimes think about government. Well, as I said at the beginning, we're small but mighty. 3.5 years ago, it started with a few staff, and then it grew a little bit to maybe a half a dozen, and now we're at 15. And really, we appreciate the growth that has been supported by government and the resources we've been given to help us meet our legislative obligations as we've sort of picked up the work and started taking on more actions as the years have passed. The other thing is that we're not the one-stop shop for everything about accessibility. It's really about everyone has a role to play. And so our work is about supporting others and collaborating, but, you know, whether it be municipalities or other departments or the strong nonprofit organizations, the disability organizations, you know, it's everybody has a role to play there, and we're one piece of it. And I guess finally, I would say that the other one is this is more than the built environment. The work is based on the definition of persons with disabilities in the Act, which is very broad. As well, the standard development work is very broad as well and includes standards that will be developed around employment and communication and transportation and education and goods and services and the built environment, but we're so much more than bricks and mortar, let's say. So I think, you know, I'll leave it at that in terms of, but a very interesting question that you raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dawn. And you might not have been able to see my excitement, but when you said that it's more than the built environment, it's one of the things that I'm most excited about. Is the built environment is hands down a key to many barriers that people with disabilities face on a daily basis, that everybody faces on a daily basis. I mean, one of the things that we've been learning more so every day is how our physical environment really causes a lot of issues for everybody. But there's nothing that thrills me more than to know that there's one standard based on built environment, and the other standards are all built around or focus on other aspects of disability and how important that is to be able to show that, you know, yes, the built environment is a priority, but it's not the only priority. And so I know reachAbility and folks everywhere are thrilled about that. And, you know, I'm really excited as I've been studying the two other accessibility legislations from Manitoba and from Ontario to really see how the pieces of the Nova Scotia legislation and the standards are really coming together. So that's really, really exciting. And we are going to ask, I'm going to ask about the standards after, but I just, first, I know that there are many different aspects to what you folks do, and there's different arms and different, like as you said, different roles for everybody. So I wanted to ask a question, but I just first want to put into context, I can't believe that there's only 15 of you down there doing the work that you're doing. reachAbility has 17 staff. And we are one organization. So the work that is coming out of the Accessibility Directorate and the policy and the change that you folks are making on behalf of the government and behalf of people with disabilities is really astronomical considering the size of your team. So hats off to you. That I'm mind blown about that. I really thought that it was, as you said, that is a misconception. I really thought that it was a much bigger department. But I wanted to ask about the Accessibility Advisory Board. So I know that there is an advisory board, and I wonder if folks recognize that there are two separate things. There's the directorate and the advisory board. So could you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Sure can. Yeah, the Accessibility Advisory Board was established through the Accessibility Act, and they provide advice to the Minister of Justice on accessibility matters and how Nova Scotia can reach the goal of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. And they do critically important work. They had a meeting just last week, and, you know, some of the conversation was around accessible, affordable housing. They often will bring other deputy ministers in to talk about their work related to employment for persons with disabilities or accessible transportation. And again, they play an important role in providing advice to ministers. So the board consists of 12 members across the province with diverse and extensive experience and expertise in accessibility. So most board members are people who identify as having a disability. And we are committed, and the government is committed to diverse representation. This is a new board. The inaugural board finished their term in February. And so this board just finished their orientation, and they had their first business meeting just last week. So they approach their work with an emphasis on the importance of first voice. So they often do sort of a number of engagement opportunities through various committees and again, inviting speakers in. And of course, they do their work in a collaborative way. Some some priorities for the board would include the work that we're doing with standards. So it actually is the responsibility of the board to make recommendations to government on accessibility standards. And then those recommendations get submitted to minister, and then they come to government to then review and work through kind of the regulatory process and the policy process. They're also very focused on raising awareness on the importance of accessibility. They play an important role in monitoring our progress towards an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. And of course, they provide feedback on the development of the next or on the Government of Nova Scotia accessibility plans. And they because of the COVID-19 they are meeting monthly versus maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and so they have a Zoom meeting once a month, and we have representation these days everywhere from Cape Breton to the Valley, and very pleased that the chairperson, Roz Penfound, was involved with the first board and, of course, provides great leadership. And one thing that's important to the board and to the directorate is that in terms of our journey towards ensuring, diverse representation on the board, we want to ensure that, when we think about the definition of disability and think about it from a physical, mental, intellectual learning or sensory impairments, episodic disability, those things that, the interactions with the barrier that hinder an individual's full and effective participation in society. If we heard from community that they didn't feel themselves, they didn't see themselves in the directorate or connected to the work of the board, we'd want to hear that. And because definitely that's top of mind for us as we work through the policies and we work through the conversations. So as it relates to the relationship between the board and the directorate, it is close, but the entities are distinct, and we provide some sort of secretarial or administrative support to the board. But they are independent of the directorate, and again, some of our business intersects with them, but they have their own work plan as well.
That's great. And I love that they are there for first person voice to hear from the people with disabilities, and that that is a place where their concerns are being addressed and taken forward. It sounds to me that the Accessibility Advisory Board is very similar to the accessibility committees that the AACs that are required for folks who are doing their action planning for the public sector bodies. So it seems to be like they are for the province as the AACs are for the folks that are doing the action plans. So that's really great that they're there to kind of advise and to bring forth information that is really representative of First Voice. So I'm really excited about that. And as a person who identifies as having a disability and is also a mother of neurodiverse children, if you have a spot or if there's ever an opening on the advisory board, keep yours truly in mind. I would definitely love to have a spot in that board and bring forward some of my concerns and share them from that perspective of being someone with an invisible disability. Yeah. Children with invisible.
And Jessica, I'll just jump in and mention that the process for applying for the board, I mean, the terms are 3 years, but the process is through the Government of Nova Scotia's agency boards and commissions, and definitely we can make that available to reachAbility and to others. But that process is open all year round. So if you applied now, there could be a vacancy in a year from now, in 2 years from now. And so, your application is in there and it would get considered through that process. So, don't wait for the call, I guess, for applications. Just go to the website and fill out the information and get your name kind of in the system.
Great. That's great information for me and for anybody else who might want to consider being on that board. So thank you for that, because it's not every day that we're given the opportunity to share our opinions and our concerns and to be told that our opinions and concerns are important. So that's really great for the viewers as well. So we've had a lot of chat about standards and we've been talking about them, and they happen to be some of my favorite things to read about. Just don't tell anybody. But I've been studying them and following along. And so I just thought maybe we could talk about where we're at with the standards development, because a lot of people know that there was a legislation, that there was rules that, as that came out that are going to need to be followed. And then maybe probably didn't hear much of the other things. And I know that the Accessibility Directorate has a lot of working groups and there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. So I just thought maybe you could give us a little update on where we're at with that standards development and what that process really looks like.
Yeah, no, thank you. And this is one of those topics that could be a session in itself. So I'll try to synthesize it, but it is a key priority in the Accessibility Act to develop accessibility standards. And I do think we've made significant progress in a very short period of time. I know that when the Act was enacted, there's a sort of a strong interest to sort of see these standards sooner than later. And, the Directorate and the Standard Development Committees and the board are committed to this work every day, but it is big work and there's big processes. And so just to give kind of a background, so the Act requires us to develop 6 standards over the next 10 years. And we're well underway on the development of the first 2 standard areas, built environment and education. And those were chosen through, feedback that was received early on through consultation, the Accessibility Directorate across Nova Scotia as priority areas. So the board was established under the Act. We've discussed that already, and it has a responsibility to develop these standard recommendations. So just this past summer, last August, they provided the Minister of Justice with their recommendations on both the built environment and the education standards. And these recommendations were publicly released. It's actually required under the Act that Minister receive them and make them public. And so these standards are now, these recommendations, I should say, are now with government, interdepartmental committees for education, and then an interdepartmental committee for built environment. And we have solicitors, and we have sort of what we call domain experts, or people that kind of work in those fields on a regular basis. And we have policy analysts, and they're working away at all the recommendations and determining, what they mean, what the implications are, how can they be rolled out, doing cost analysis. And so our hope is that we will see these enacted, the education and built environment, in a phased approach beginning in 2022 and then through 2023. So that's not that far away. We're kind of another year out. And but there will be some consultation that we'll be communicating kind of later on in the fall about opportunities again to sort of see this work. And I can't fully convey the amount of work that has been done by the Accessibility Advisory Board and the 2 standard development committees and the staff at the Directorate to develop these recommendations. And, everything from jurisdictional reviews to looking at best practice research across the world to, of course, some of the consultation that has been done on the standards and other topics, and all the meetings that have taken place. And we appreciate everybody who's contributed to this work. And, if you're hearing this and thinking, gosh, I really haven't, been invited or known about an opportunity to engage or read or consult, please send us an email and let us know, and we'll get you on a database. But over the next 2 years, Built Environment and Education Committees actually continue their work. They're developing the next phase of recommendations. So it has been kind of a phased-in approach. And again, important part of this work will be the impact assessments that will go forward to government. But before I finish off commenting on, I want to talk about the next 4 standards. So we'll begin developing the 4 remaining standards, which include goods and services and information and communication, transportation, and employment. And we will, to meet our commitment of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030, we're going to begin 1 standard area this year and then start an additional standard every year after. So stay tuned. I think there will be an announcement soon about the 3rd standard that we will begin work on this year.
Thank you so much for that, Dawn. And like I said, the standards, I'm right up on staying in touch with what's happening, and I'm already taking bets on what the next standard is going to be. So I won't say it out loud because I don't want to jinx it, but I feel it. I feel it in my bones, and I'm excited for it. And I know that there is a lot of work going on, and So thank you for that. And again, thank you to everyone who's been doing that. I wanted to switch over and ask my pal Terry Lynn, because I know that you are the girl with the details when it comes to what's happening, what's going on, when can we expect change and results? And I also know that, you can give some insight on what is available for people. You and I have chatted a lot before, and I know that there are some grants, not necessarily through the Accessibility Directorate, but places where people can go, or that we've been advising small business and things to kind of look to. So I was just wondering if you can give some insight on, what's happening, where can people go, and kind of like what's next.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I'm going to pick up for a minute just on that standard discussion that you and Dawn were just having, because you talked about your interest in the board, and there might be other Nova Scotians out there who are interested in serving in and providing their insight as we do our work. And so those standard development committees, when that announcement gets made on what the next standard area is, there will actually be a call for recruitment to the standard development committee. And that's comprised, just like every piece of work that we do, half of the members must be persons with disabilities or from organizations representing persons with disabilities. So just to put a plug in there for when that announcement comes out on what the next standard area, that whether you or some of the folks watching this right now might be interested in that particular standard area and getting involved. So there is an application process, but stay tuned. So just getting back onto to what you really were asking me about, I'm always happy to talk about the accessibility work that we're doing in Nova Scotia. And really, at the end of the day, what difference is it going to make? Because we're doing this to make things better for Nova Scotians with disabilities. And I do need to go back to, again, see, I'm going to go back there to the standards work, because really the work that we're trying to do is you're going to see the changes. Nova Scotians will see the changes as those standards are developed and implemented. And Nova Scotians will see improved accessibility in all of those 6 standard areas. And we're at the Directorate developing ways to monitor and evaluate those improvements so that we're able to show the progress that we're making. But in the meantime, and in addition to standard development, there's a lot of other work underway on accessibility throughout government. So I'd like to share just a little bit about what government's doing to make our programs and services more accessible for Nova Scotians with disabilities. Nova Scotians who are disabled, that there are a number of programs for disabled Nova Scotians provided by various government departments, whether it supports throughout the education system, including early childhood, primary to grade 12 or post-secondary, the employment supports that are available through labor and advanced education, or the disability supports program through the Department of Community Services. And there's also many other programs that are provided to all Nova Scotians, including the 30% who identify as having at least one disability. And Dawn mentioned this before. She talked about how government of Nova Scotia made a commitment to be a leader in accessibility. And that includes in how we provide goods and services and programs to Nova Scotia. And that back in 2018, we released the first Government of Nova Scotia Accessibility Plan. And that plan has 23 commitments from 5 different priority areas, and it was developed by government with input from Nova Scotians, including disabled Nova Scotians. And we've made quite a bit of progress on those commitments, and that progress is reported annually through the Minister's Annual Report on Accessibility. All of these documents, Jessica, people don't need to hear everything from me today. It would take too long, but all of these documents are available on the Accessibility Directorate website. And we're actually working now on the Minister's Annual Report for 2020-2021. Now, to help develop the plan back in 2018, and because we've talked about how it's not just about the Directorate, all departments have a role to play in accessibility, government established a committee comprised of key leaders in accessibility from across government and from across departments. So this interdepartmental committee on accessibility has been supporting accessibility work in their own departments and then coming together to support a cross-government movement on accessibility. So I am getting to your point, really. I'll get there eventually. So what's happened so far? Well, work on implementation of that first plan has been happening, and we've also been looking to build accessibility into the existing programs and services that are provided by government. So some things might be seen by the public, and some things are being seen internally. So, for example, the Public Service Commission has developed mandatory diversity training that all public staff participate in. And Communications Nova Scotia has provided accessibility in the government website. And I'm sure all of us are aware of the American Sign Language interpreters now, who are regularly a part of Premier's briefings on COVID-19, which is really important to ensure that deaf Nova Scotians have access to the same information as all Nova Scotians. Labour and Advanced Education has made changes to their skills development program to improve access for persons with disabilities. Early childhood education and early childhood development has incorporated accessibility into the curriculum through using some of the Rick Hansen Foundation materials. And while Lands and Forestry, they have made incredible improvements to accessibility in parks, beaches, and campsites throughout Nova Scotia. And this is really even more important now as so many of us don't have access to some of the recreation activities that we might normally take part of during the pandemic. So now Nova Scotians who are disabled will find accessible beach access, toilets, comfort stations, shelters, sport fishing docks, and campsites throughout the province. And there's certainly more to do. Well, and you talked about the grants, and I'm going to actually ask Dawn to talk about that in a few minutes, because she's really familiar with those grant programs that Communities, Culture, and Heritage provides. I might have even mixed that up, so I might have to re-say that. But there is more to do, and I'm probably getting way ahead of some of the discussion or questions you might even ask me, Jessica. I'm really happy to share with all of those who are watching today that we're starting work on government's next accessibility plan. So as Dawn mentioned, the first plan was for 2018, and it takes us to 2021. So we're in that last year cycle of the plan, and we're starting to develop the 2022 to 2025 plan. And we're going to be looking for input and collaboration throughout the development process from our government departments, from the Accessibility Advisory Board, and from disabled Nova Scotians and disability organizations throughout the late summer, early fall. You know, every government accessibility plan is an important one. First one laid our foundation for accessibility, and this second plan is going to take us only 5 years out from our goal of an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. So you can be sure that this next plan is going to be really focused on showing government's continued commitment to being an accessible leader and having accessibility throughout our programs and services. So we'll be really looking forward to engaging you and those who may be watching today as we develop that. And maybe Jessica, I can turn it over to Dawn to talk about some of the grant programs.
I would love that. To talk about the business accessibility grants from CCH, and you quoted it right, Terry Lynn. You second guessed yourself. It definitely is Communities, Culture, and Heritage. And I know that we didn't really prepare for that, but Dawn, would you mind sharing just a little bit about the business accessibility grants? Great.
Yeah, no, they're two very important grants, and actually just a couple of years ago government committed additional funds, and so now the Community Accessibility Grant Program has a full budget of $1 million, and the Business Accessibility Grant Program is the same. The Community Accessibility Grant Program, I'll speak about that one first, actually has had a few guideline changes this year that I think are great. The first one is it's up to $50,000. So if you were applying to this grant program just even a year ago, it could have been capped at $10,000. So $50,000 is a really great improvement. And it funds up to 2/3 of the costs associated with the accessibility project. So you could be a registered nonprofit to sort of be considered for this grant, as well as a federal charity or Mi'kmaq community, municipality, town or village, a legion. And what I learned actually today is the universities and colleges fall under this grant program as well. So that's great. And so again, some really good improvements happening, especially they align with the work that as we move forward with prescribed public sector bodies. One thing though that has changed is they have gone to one deadline a year. So the deadline this year was April 30th, and they have had a amazing response. Over 110 applications are in. So they have not, Minister has not made final decision, but I suspect that they are kind of subscribed for the year. But you can definitely contact CCH with your ideas, and they could put your, get your proposal going, and it could be considered for a next year. Business accessibility is taking applications on an ongoing basis, and they still have money available this year in that program. And that one actually funds 5 different categories for business. It may be the built environment, but it could also be assistive devices, communications, transportation, and also education. And that program will fund at around 66% of the cost of the project or the initiative, up to $100,000. So again, there's a great opportunity there for businesses to consider everything from, maybe it's an accessible website, maybe it's signage, it could be the ramp and the pathway and the accessible bathroom that is needed. But again, there's some great opportunities there, and I think they'll be they're open right now. And again, encourage folks to contact CCH about that program if they are registered as a business in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I absolutely love those 2 grant streams. And if you do require that and you're unable to find it, just reach out to us at reachAbility and we can point you in the right direction, because we are very familiar with those. And I love that they also cover education, because that's key. Education is key to eliminating barriers for people with disabilities. And it's one of the things that a lot of grants, especially ones that focus on like built environment or that are more built environment heavy, don't cover. So thank you for sharing about that. And so we've made Carla wait forever, but I'm really glad that she's stuck around and is here to answer some questions, because I know that Carla will be able to really talk about what some of our viewers are probably hoping for. And that is, does the Accessibility Directorate have navigators to assist people with disabilities with finding resources? And those could be resources from anything from financial supports to accommodations or assistive devices, or even the most recent thing that we've been running into is to help people find ASL interpreters, as a lot of medical appointments have turned to being online, and not very many doctors or in the medical profession have the ability to provide ASL interpretation, or probably none to be exact. And so that's something finding, because ASL interpreters are few and far between, they're so busy, being able to find them and find funding for that is something that a lot of people have been asking. So Carla, could you give us some insight on, where the line kind of draws with the Accessibility Directorate when it comes to those, or how you're able to help navigate pointing people in the right direction?
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, that's a great question. And I know naturally you've directed this towards me, because you and I have even touched base several times to connect with individuals who have reached out to me and reached out to you and reachAbility. So certainly I can touch on that a little, but I do want to give Dawn an opportunity to speak to this a little bit as well first, because I know Dawn had some points prepared as well, and then maybe hand it back to me.
Yeah, that would be, thanks, Carla. And the definitely, navigation services is a very important conversation. And we recognize at the Directorate that there's many challenges for Nova Scotians with disabilities and their families to find programs and supports and services that they need. And government has made a commitment to our accessibility plan to explore the establishment of accessibility navigators to assist persons with disabilities in accessing information and services. And so we've been doing that work and looking at what opportunities there are to improve navigation services for Nova Scotians with disabilities. We've met with disability organizations, with government departments, and Nova Scotians with disabilities for advice and feedback. And we know that there are a number of organizations like reachAbility that already offer great navigation services in Nova Scotia, and we appreciate and value the work of these organizations. But in the meantime, we do receive inquiries and calls and emails from persons with disabilities, and Carla fields these navigation related calls. And so I'll pass it over to my colleague to kind of talk a bit about that work.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. So yeah, of course, we receive inquiries and emails and phone calls from individuals in the community who have a disability and are looking for assistance in finding a solution, sometimes to a situation they may have encountered, or they may be experiencing barriers and need assistance and support in finding the proper resources and programs and supports that are available in our communities. So, Jessica, as I'm sure you're aware, these kinds of inquiries can vary greatly. And so, it's really a matter for me of finding the right information to support individuals. And sometimes it's a matter of providing them with information so that they're able to advocate for themselves. And in other instances, it can be connecting individuals with, sometimes it's a legal aid program, or it's a social work, the social work clinic, or a social worker or a caseworker. As you know, many times I've connected folks with the programs that are available through reachAbility, which has been really such a great, so many great programs to be able to refer people to when appropriate. So. Other times it can be other programs such as the disability support programs or other things that are offered within government departments. And so, there are many supports available in Nova Scotia, and it can be challenging to navigate those many supports that are available. And certainly there's a lot of information out there. So of course we try to support individuals with finding the right information and making the right connections.
Yeah, I think that's great. We have connected on a number of occasions, and teamwork makes the dream work. So, there's some of the questions and concerns that come up, they're not easy fixes. And really, one thing that I've learned in my years of working in the nonprofit sector is that there are so many organizations that I still don't even know about. Right, there are so many amazing organizations and nonprofits and government agencies that I've never even heard about, and I like to think that I know quite a bit when it comes to those things, because we navigate a lot, right? That's what we do. When you establish trust, as the Accessibility Directorate has established with people with disabilities in the province of Nova Scotia, and as reachAbility does with our clients, you get a lot of inquiries, and people need you to kind of help them sort through that stuff. And I think that's great that our province has so many amazing resources that we can kind of reach out to. But Carla, a lot of the stuff we talk about is not about navigating the specific things for people with disabilities, but it is about the prescribed public sector bodies. In the work that we're doing through reachAbility and our accessibility services. We've come to you a bit and chatted. So we've talked about that, the prescribed public sector bodies a lot. And that's something that we all know what that means, but a lot of our viewers may not understand what that means. But I'll tell you my favorite thing about it is that, and our CEO, Tova Sherman, always says the fish thinks from the head, which is a very East Coast thing for Tova to say. And if you know Tova, you've probably heard it already. But what she means by that is that you have to lead by example, and that the leadership needs to start at the top. So what I love about prescribed public sector bodies and what that means when it comes to the standards and the legislation is that the province of Nova Scotia is, starting with them, right? We're starting with like the leaders or the more government regulated entities, and that they're being held accountable first to this legislation. So that really excites me. And when trying to explain to other people and to other organizations that, the government's starting with them first, that really helps to kind of push home the message that how important this is, and that the government's taking it extremely seriously. So can you tell us a little bit more about the prescribed public sector bodies and kind of example of who they are and what that means.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad that you bring that up, because we talked about the work that the Accessibility Directorate and the Accessibility Advisory Board are doing, and the work that other departments within government have done. And so, yeah, it's I definitely want to talk a little bit about some of the really great work that is being done in our communities to advance accessibility. And namely, as you mentioned, the prescribed public sector bodies. So under the Accessibility Act, certain organizations are prescribed. And so what that means is that they have certain requirements that they have to meet as it relates to accessibility. And I'll touch on what those requirements are, but just first I'll go over the prescribed public sector bodies. So there are two kind of groups. There is one group that is, they were prescribed as of April 1st, 2021. And that group includes Nova Scotia universities, Nova Scotia Community College, public libraries, and municipalities. And so the second group that will be prescribed as of April 1st, 2022 is the Crown Corporations, Nova Scotia Health, IWK, the RCEs and CSAP, so the PETA 12 school system, and a couple others. So that's the second group. And once prescribed, they do have some requirements to meet. And within 1 year, these prescribed public sector bodies have to assemble an accessibility advisory committee. And in keeping with the other committees we've talked about, it is a requirement that at least one half of the membership of those accessibility advisory committees is made up of persons with disabilities or people who represent organizations that represent people with disabilities. So that's a requirement, the accessibility advisory committees. And as well, within 1 year, they have to develop an accessibility plan for their organization. And so this is a huge piece of work. The accessibility plans have to touch on, their current situation. So what are their successes already as it relates to accessibility, and what are their barriers, and how are they going to remove and prevent barriers to accessibility within their operations and their organizations. So those plans do have to be completed again within 1 year of prescription, and they have to be updated every 3 years, and they have to be posted online and publicly available once they're completed. Of course, another requirement of prescribed public sector bodies is that they do have to comply with the accessibility standards as they are developed and enacted. So as you can imagine, of course, that's a huge piece of work. And so the Accessibility Directorate, we work closely with these prescribed public sector bodies to provide support. And a lot of times that can look like developing different resources, so webinars, written resources, toolkits, guides, that sort of thing. And many of those are on our website if anyone was interested in seeing some more information. And so I wanted to share a few of the successes of some of the prescribed public sector bodies as well. So one thing that I wanted to touch on was the post-secondary sector. They developed collaboratively an accessibility framework. And so that framework, it outlines the collective commitments and goals of the Nova Scotia universities and Nova Scotia Community College as it relates to accessibility. And we are the first province with a post-secondary accessibility framework, so it's really exciting. And the libraries our public libraries in the province followed in the footsteps and are also developing an accessibility framework collaboratively too. So that's really, really exciting. There are a few accessibility plans that are actually already completed. So the Wolfville Accessibility Plan, this was the first municipality to create their plan. And also recently, the Joint Committee in the South Shore, so that's the Lunenburg County Joint Accessibility Committee, and And that's made up of 5 different municipalities. So I'm referring to my notes here just so I don't mix them up, but it's the town of Lunenburg partnered with the municipality of the district of Lunenburg, the town of Bridgewater, town of Mahone Bay, and municipality of the district of Chester. So that joint committee has finalized and had their accessibility plan approved as well by council. So that's on their website publicly now too, if anyone was interested. Another one is the town of Kentville. So they have their accessibility advisory committee assembled and they're working on their accessibility plan. And they have an accessibility page on their website that provides information and updates on the work they're doing. And we also saw an update from them the other day that they updated their entire website to be compatible with screen readers and other devices to navigate the pages on that website with assistive technology. So we thought that was a nice thing to share too. But there are many other prescribed public sector bodies that have begun this work and have started assembling their advisory committees. Many have had their inaugural accessibility advisory committee meetings, which I've been lucky to be a part of many of those, first initial meetings and provide some information. And it's really great to be a part of that and see that work happening. And many of the plans are underway as well. So lots of great news to share as it relates to the prescribed public sector bodies.
Yeah, very exciting work. I was actually speaking with the South Shore group very recently, and they mentioned that they are moving ahead with their action plan and starting to follow through with some of the recommendations that they put in there. So they're really moving along. And because of one of the roles that I have, I get to work and hear from a lot of different organizations and municipalities. And so it's really exciting to see how the province of Nova Scotia is really getting behind this. And in typical Nova Scotia fashion, we could have, gave ourselves a little bit of leeway and taken it easy during the pandemic and made a lot of excuses as to why we were going to slow down. But it's really exciting to see that the municipalities are on it. We were able to work alongside the town of Kentville and working with their plan, and we were engaging with the public in any way that we could, and they really have a great team there that's really focused on putting that plan into action. So that's really exciting that they've almost, I know that during the council meeting they announced or they presented the action plan, so that should be added to your list soon, as soon as they approve it. So that's really exciting. Yeah. But there's a lot of, the province of Nova Scotia is full of municipal groups that are really working hard to meet that prescribed public sector deadline, or that, expectation of within the first year. So there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, which brings us full circle to the fact that, even though we don't necessarily see what's happening, there are people, the whole province is trying to engage people with disabilities, because one of the things that's a part of creating that action plan is getting that first person voice, right? It's not based on, I decide that we need to have better roads, and so let it be so. It's really based upon a lot of first person engagement, which is the process of this whole thing. That's like the theme that I hear with this chat that we're having, is that on all levels, whether it's the Accessibility Directorate, the advisory board, the municipal government levels, public sector bodies, everybody is really trying to not make the decisions based on what they think is best, but to really go to the people that are going to be affected by the policy that's being made, which is the people with disabilities, and allowing them to lead the conversation, which is probably the best conversation for us to have during National Accessibility Week, which is, here to not necessarily emphasize the provincial legislations, but to talk about the Canadian Accessibility Canada Act, which came into place. It reached royal assent a year after the province of Nova Scotia enacted our legislation. And, you know, we're a little bit behind. We're about 35 years behind the US with their Accessibility Act, but we're there. And the federal government is rolling that out. And so it's just really great to be able to have so much good news coming from Nova Scotia to be able to share to all of Canada through our National Accessibility Week digital conference. So I'm really excited that we were able to get this together and to be able to show Nova Scotians what everybody's doing behind the scenes to make Nova Scotia the most accessible, there I am with my list, the most accessible province in Canada, because I think we're going to get there. And I do agree with you, Dawn. It seemed 9 years seems like a really long time, but in the world of accessibility and knowing what that's going to take, it doesn't seem long enough, but we're really excited that we've given ourselves a challenge as a province to kind of push towards that. So I'm really excited. Never in my life, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, that I would be excited about anything that has to do with policy. But I'm really excited about this and seeing our province come together in yet another challenging time. But we're coming together to keep things moving forward. So there's no other time that's more important to people with disabilities than right now. So I think it's important that we keep pushing forward. Did you have any other closing remarks, or did we miss anything? I feel like we've touched on a lot. I've kept you around a long time, but I mean, I feel like I'm with my girl gang right now. I could talk standards all day.
Well, Jessica, on behalf of the Directorate, I mean, thank you to reachAbility for the opportunity and connecting with us. This has been an amazing opportunity to talk about the progress made, the work they're doing, but the work we're doing. But we value and appreciate everything that reachAbility is doing with its amazing programs and services and outreach. And again, if anybody would like to connect with the Directorate, we're available at, you can get our contact information and our resources at novascotia.ca/accessibility, and we'd be pleased to hear from folks.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming. And we hope you tune in for the rest of National Accessibility Week and see all the other things that Nova Scotia and Canada has to offer around accessibility awareness. Have a good day. Bye-bye.